Prepare yourself for an intense journey of suspense, courage, and resilience. Emiliano and Isabella's story will captivate you from beginning to end, with surprising twists and turns and characters facing impossible challenges. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe for more exciting narratives like this one. The fight against evil is only beginning, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Stay with us and follow each chapter of this saga full of tension and overcoming obstacles. The small village of Tizimin, in the heart of Mexico, seemed the definition of tranquility. The scorching sun bathed the simple houses and dirt roads in gold. Life here was marked by the rhythm of the seasons and ancient customs, where everyone knew and helped each other. However, behind this facade of peace, a dark secret lay hidden. Not far from there, on a small, isolated hill, was the San Jose Orphanage, an institution that cared for the orphan children of the region. It was a warm afternoon when the first signs of something wrong began to appear. The typical silence of the village was broken by the roar of powerful engines, followed by suspicious movement on the road leading to the orphanage. Emiliano, a calm-looking young gardener, watched from the window of the small back house where he lived. He had been hired a few months ago to take care of the orphanage's gardens, and although he was a simple man, his presence there was no mere coincidence. He knew that this place hid much more than the children could perceive. As the shadows of late afternoon stretched across the landscape, a convoy of luxury vehicles, armored cars and imposing pickup trucks came into view. They were no ordinary visitors. Emiliano knew what that meant. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, was arriving. The sound of the engines ceased, and within minutes the place was surrounded by heavily armed men with impassive faces that showed they knew what they were doing. They had raided many places before, terrorizing villages and extorting resources. But at that moment, they didn't know what awaited them. Emiliano watched the activity from inside the garden shed, his hands firmly gripping the hoe, as if it were an extension of his own body. He wasn't just the gardener. No one there knew, but Emiliano had a past marked by shadows. His life had been forged in battles and secrets, and the orphanage's mission was more than a simple task of caring for flowers and plants. The CJNG men, realizing the nature of the invasion, quickly spread out across the surrounding area, blocking all exits. They knew they were after something or someone. What Emiliano had hidden for so long was no longer safe, and the moment to reveal his true role was fast approaching. He gazed at the horizon, where the sunlight was beginning to fade, and felt the weight of the decision. It was time to act. The first thing to do was ensure the children's safety. But, contrary to what the cartel had hoped, this orphanage was far from a vulnerable target. Emiliano knew the terrain was his ally. He had spent days planning, observing, and preparing for this moment. The trees, the buildings, and even the winding paths around the orphanage became his weapons. Inside the orphanage, the children were in a panic, not understanding what was happening. But Emiliano had a plan, and he knew the key lay in the shadows. With agile movements, he used the resources around him, tree trunks, thick branches, and even the sewer system, to move unseen. While the henchmen spread terror, Emiliano moved silently, ready to confront the enemy in a way no one could have predicted. Deep down, he knew this wouldn't be just another confrontation. What was about to happen would transform the battle between good and evil into something personal. The fight wouldn't be for mere survival. Emiliano carried within him the strength of a dark past, of a man who had sworn vengeance. He wasn't just a gardener, he was a guardian, a defender of the children and the secret they could never discover. The San Jose Orphanage, though isolated, was more than just a simple shelter for children. Founded decades ago, the place was steeped in the legends and traditions of the region. The stone and wood buildings were robust, with large windows overlooking the vast countryside. The sound of the wind in the trees and the rustling of the leaves made the place even more mysterious. For the residents of Tizimin, the orphanage was a symbol of hope, a safe haven, far from the growing violence that plagued the country. But for Emiliano, the orphanage represented something much deeper, something he had sworn to protect. He remembered when he arrived there, a lost, aimless young man. Tizimin wasn't his hometown, but he felt more connected to it than anywhere else. Drawn to the quietness of the place, he found purpose in tending to the orphanage's plants and gardens. Gradually, he became more than just a gardener, adopting the role of guardian. The curious children never questioned why he remained so reserved. They saw him as a distant uncle, someone trustworthy, but no one knew about the dark parts of Emiliano's past. As a young man, Emiliano was recruited into a Mexican government special force, trained for clandestine missions. But a life of secrets and betrayals led him down a different path. His commitment to justice became an obsession, and after being presumed dead on a failed mission, he disappeared, leaving behind his old name. He was no longer the man the government or the armed forces knew. He was Emiliano, the man who protected the orphanage from the shadows, and he had a personal bond with the children, one that perhaps no one fully understood. Among the children was a girl named Isabella, a 12-year-old who stood out for her sharp intelligence and immense curiosity. Isabella had her own story, marked by the early loss of her parents. She was one of the most observant in the group, always attentive to any movement around her. On one of the quieter days, she approached Emiliano while he was tending to the plants and, with a perceptive look, asked, "Have you ever seen a snake camouflage itself among the leaves?" Emiliano, not quite understanding what she meant, replied with a smile, "Yes, they know how to hide well, like us." At that moment, Emiliano realized that the girl was more attentive to the world around her than she seemed. This made him see in her something he himself feared, the ability to see more than people normally see. On the other side were the members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. The CJNG was a powerful and ruthless organization, known for its cruelty and the control it exerted over drug trafficking and other crimes. But their methods weren't just brutal. Their strategy involved infiltration and social control, slowly undermining any resistance that arose in their path. The cartel's leaders never showed their faces. They hid in the shadows, like shadows over the very men who worked for them. The operation in Tizimin, however, had a clear purpose. They were after something Emiliano knew very well, a secret that had to be kept at all costs. As Emiliano prepared to confront the cartel, he knew it wasn't just his life at stake. The lives of the children were directly at risk, and the secret he protected was the key to everything happening in that region. What seemed like a simple cartel raid would soon reveal itself as part of a much larger conspiracy, touching the deepest roots of Mexican history. Emiliano was ready for this. He had faced far worse monsters before. That night, as the first gunshots began to echo around the San Jose orphanage, Emiliano knew the moment had arrived. He moved through the shadows with the same ease as a predator, his hands steady, his mind sharp. The CJNG wasn't simply going to destroy the orphanage. They were after something more. Emiliano was aware of this, but what he didn't know was how close they were to discovering the truth. The cartel members began to search the place, invading each room, brutally interrogating the children and staff. Emiliano, however, remained invisible, using the terrain to his advantage. The orphanage, with its dense vegetation and winding paths, was his territory. He knew exactly where to hide, how to move undetected, but even that didn't prepare him for what was to come. As Emiliano positioned himself to intervene, one of the hitmen, the group's leader, entered the security room where one of the monitors displayed the surveillance cameras. Emiliano watched from afar, his eyes fixed on the ruthless-looking man who examined every detail, as if he knew something was amiss. When the CJNG leader looked directly at the camera, Emiliano had a dark premonition. Had he already been discovered? But before he could react, the hitman turned and left, leaving the monitor on. The situation was spiraling out of control, but Emiliano couldn't back down. Time was against him. He needed to act fast before the children were dragged into a confrontation they couldn't possibly understand. Meanwhile, inside the orphanage, Isabella, with her sharp mind, began to piece things together. She realized something was wrong long before the CJNG arrived. Her curiosity led her to uncover small details, like Emiliano's furtive steps and the nervous faces of the staff. She wasn't just observing the external chaos, but also the movements of the adults around her. When the cartel leader arrived at the security room and saw the camera was on, Isabella was right behind him, trying to understand what was happening. The cartel leader, realizing that something was unfolding beyond what was expected, gave orders to intensify the search. They were looking for something very specific. Emiliano knew this. He knew the cartel wouldn't leave until it found what it wanted. He had discovered long ago that the CJNG had eyes and ears all over the country, and that Orphanage wasn't just a refuge for orphaned children. It was a place of strategic importance, shrouded in a secret so dangerous that the cartel itself could destroy everything to keep it hidden. As chaos unfolded, Emiliano and Isabella began working together, though still without a full understanding of what they were facing. Isabella, with her sharp intelligence, was more attentive to every movement than ever before. She became increasingly involved in defending the place, and this awakened in Emiliano an immense protectiveness towards the girl. Over time, he had become an indirect mentor to her, but he never imagined that the girl could be such a crucial ally at that moment. Inside the building, the CJNG members advanced, spreading out into the different rooms and halls. Emiliano was just steps away from intercepting them, but before he could act, a distant explosion shook the orphanage. It was a trap. The cartel had prepared a coordinated offensive with explosives and simultaneous attacks to weaken the orphanage's defenses and capture those responsible for the secret. Emiliano ran, his heart racing as he observed the destruction around him. He knew the children were in real danger and that his only chance to protect them was to put himself at risk. But before he could make a decision, a new figure appeared in the shadows, a mysterious man Emiliano never expected to see again. It was someone from his past, someone who could alter the course of everything. With the CJNG invasion, the San Jose orphanage was transformed into a battlefield, where the lines between good and evil began to blur. While Emiliano and Isabella tried to maintain control of the situation, other elements of the plot began to reveal themselves unexpectedly, making the conflict even more complex. Inside the orphanage, the staff were torn between loyalty and fear. Some, fearing for their own safety, began to question Emiliano, who had always kept them at a distance. To them, he wasn't just a gardener. There was something more to him, an aura of mystery that generated both respect and distrust. When the cartel's threat became clear, some tried to flee, while others gathered in small groups to discuss what to do. But the moment the explosions rocked the orphanage, everyone knew that escape was no longer a viable option. Emiliano, though cautious, tried to coordinate the defense, but the lack of trust from the other staff only complicated matters. Isabella, for her part, became more active and involved in the resistance strategy. She was no longer just an observer. Her sharp intelligence and courage set her apart from the others. She began infiltrating the most dangerous areas of the orphanage, gathering vital information and trying to find ways to sabotage the hitmen's operations. At one point, she discovered a secret of Emiliano's own, a hidden compartment under the garden floor, filled with antique equipment and weapons. Isabella didn't know exactly what he kept there, but now she understood that he was more prepared than he seemed to confront the cartel. The connection between Emiliano and Isabella grew stronger with each passing moment, as the two shared responsibilities and ideas. The young girl knew she could trust him, but she also felt the pressure of carrying the weight of defending the orphanage alone. Emiliano, on the other hand, felt an even greater responsibility for Isabella, something he hadn't anticipated. Seeing the girl in action, he realized that she wasn't just a victim of the situation. She was a warrior, disguised as a child. On the cartel's side, the situation was becoming increasingly tense. The CJNG men were searching for something, the secret Emiliano was guarding at all costs. The group's leader, who until then seemed in control, was beginning to lose his patience. He knew something was being hidden and that the children in the orphanage were not mere pawns in a power game. There was something far more valuable there. The cartel leader, who until then had acted with calculated precision, began to act with more violence, putting pressure on everyone around him. But the chaos wasn't limited to the clashes between Emiliano and the cartel. Another shadow was approaching, a mysterious figure Emiliano recognized as soon as he saw her. It was a woman with familiar features who emerged from the shadows at the most critical moment. She had a direct connection to Emiliano's past and knew more about the orphanage than anyone else. The reunion with her brought an avalanche of conflicting feelings. Although the woman seemed to be an ally, her past was full of betrayals, and Emiliano knew he couldn't fully trust her. She, in turn, was there for a purpose of her own. It wasn't just the children's fate that brought her to the orphanage, but something directly related to the secret Emiliano was trying to protect. The woman knew that if the cartel found what it was looking for, everything would be lost. But unlike Emiliano, she was willing to do whatever it took to ensure the secret's survival, even if it meant betraying former allies. As tensions mounted, the connection between Emiliano and Isabella deepened. He knew she was no longer just an orphan. She had become a key piece in the puzzle of his own survival. But at the same time, the weight of the decisions he would have to make became increasingly evident. Every action he took had consequences, and he could no longer hide his true nature. The orphanage, which had once seemed a simple shelter for children, was now becoming the epicenter of an imminent battle between Emiliano, the cartel, and forces he himself didn't understand. As the CJNG advanced through the facilities, with violence and chaos taking over every corner, a silent tension hung in the air. Emiliano knew time was running out. The secret he kept, something more powerful than any weapon, was about to be revealed. And with it, the truth about who he really was and what was at stake. The mysterious figure that had emerged from the shadows, the woman from his past, approached Emiliano. Their eyes met in a tense moment. She was no longer the ally he had imagined. She was an undercover agent from the cartel itself, someone who had been sent to dismantle the orphanage from the inside out. Emiliano felt his stomach churn at the realization of the betrayal, but there was no more time for lamenting. She approached him, her voice as cold as steel. "Did you really think you could hide this from us forever?" she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Emiliano, his face pale, tried to pull away, but she had already planted the seed of doubt. What she knew was more than he could imagine. Emiliano felt an unbearable weight on his shoulders. He had been trying to protect the orphanage and the children all this time, but now he discovered that his true enemy had been right beside him the whole time. He prepared to confront her, but before he could make a move, the woman revealed the real reason why the CJNG had invaded the orphanage. The secret Emiliano kept wasn't just a treasure. It was a collection of confidential documents that could bring down the cartel and many other powerful figures in Mexico. These documents weren't just linked to drug trafficking, but also to high-level corruption involving politicians and businessmen who financed the cartel, fueling a seemingly unstoppable cycle of violence. Emiliano, as part of a secret Mexican government operation years earlier, had been tasked with hiding this vital evidence. The orphanage, in effect, served as a hiding place for evidence that could bring down an empire of powerful criminals. The turning point was a shocking revelation. The woman wasn't there to save anyone. She was part of a cell that aimed to destroy any vestige of resistance to this empire. And for her, the children were just pawns in a much larger game. The real battle wasn't about controlling the orphanage. It was about destroying the last line of defense against a system of corruption that was spreading throughout the nation. But, contrary to what she expected, Emiliano didn't let himself be defeated. The revelation was a shock, yes, but it was also what he needed to make a definitive decision. He could no longer protect the secret alone, not without doing justice to everything the country had lost to violence and corruption. He looked at Isabella, who for a moment seemed lost in the midst of it all, but who was now beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. "That's why we're here, isn't it?" Isabella asked, her voice firm. "We're not just trying to survive, we're trying to fight." Emiliano, with a grim smile, replied, "Yes, we are. And now we have a chance." With a new purpose, he and Isabella prepared for a final battle. Emiliano knew the odds were stacked against them, but for the first time he felt a sense of relief. He was no longer alone. The war against the cartel had become a fight for justice, and he would not allow the secret he protected to be used to perpetuate corruption and death. As the CJNG leader approached with his men, Emiliano and Isabella hatched a daring plan. They knew time was running out and that at any moment the cartel could destroy everything. But with the support of the person he least expected, Emiliano was prepared to take a decisive step toward confrontation, facing his own past and the violent present of Mexico. The revelation of the secret kept by Emiliano had completely altered the course of the battle. The orphanage, once a simple shelter, had now become the last bastion of resistance against a ruthless system of corruption. The consequences of his actions and the betrayal of the mysterious woman began to unfold, bringing intense reactions from everyone involved. Isabella, though still young, now understood the gravity of the situation. Her brilliant mind began to connect the pieces of the puzzle: the cartel, the government, the corruption, and the crucial role the orphanage played. She had grown up in a world of shadows, but now she was more than a mere spectator. Isabella had unwittingly become a protagonist in a war that transcended the boundaries of anything she had ever imagined. And looking at Emiliano, she realized that he was not only her protector, but also someone she deeply admired. What had begun as simple trust was now transforming into an unbeatable alliance. As Emiliano processed the betrayal of the woman he had known from the past, a wave of anger and disappointment washed over him. He had always known that his past was linked to difficult choices, but he never imagined he would be confronted so directly. What he had done until then, keeping the secret and protecting the children, seemed an arduous but necessary task. Now, the discovery he had kept secret for so long was about to be manipulated by those who wished to destroy Mexico's future. Emiliano knew that even with Isabella by his side, the consequences of this battle would not be easy. The cartel wouldn't give up so easily. They wouldn't leave without ensuring the secret was destroyed. The explosions and attacks began to intensify. Every room in the orphanage seemed to be invaded, every window becoming a point of vulnerability. But instead of giving in to despair, Emiliano felt a renewed determination. He now knew that what was at stake was much greater than his own life. The future of the country, the children, and even justice was in his hands. However, the cartel's response was not immediate. The CJNG leader, realizing the situation was becoming increasingly tense and out of control, began to modify his strategy. He knew that to completely destroy the orphanage, he needed more than brute force. He needed manipulation, deception, and psychological pressure. Instead of attacking directly, he began to infiltrate, creating a web of betrayal that extended even to Emiliano's own allies. Like a cunning predator, he sought to find weaknesses in Emiliano's defenses, weakening its internal alliances. Meanwhile, the orphanage staff, who had previously been divided, began to react in unexpected ways. Some, aware of the fight for justice that was taking place, joined Emiliano and Isabella. Others, overcome by fear, tried to flee or sabotage what remained of their defenses. The orphanage, with its walls that had witnessed so many stories of abandonment, now became the stage for a battle for survival and for truth. Every choice made by every person within that place would have repercussions, both for the present and for the future. The most impactful aspect, however, was the reaction of the children themselves. They, who had always lived in a world of uncertainty and pain, were now beginning to understand what was happening around them. The fight for truth, freedom, and justice was taking place right there before their eyes. Many of them, like Isabella, began to actively participate in the resistance. In moments of despair, they found within themselves strengths they never imagined they possessed. What had previously seemed like a place of shelter and abandonment was now becoming a symbol of resistance. Tension mounted as the cartel leader and his men approached the heart of the orphanage. Emiliano, Isabella, and the others were surrounded, but their resolve had never been stronger. Each step the cartel took toward the heart of the orphanage was another step towards the final confrontation. The secret, kept in the shadows for so long, now became the key to liberation or total destruction. With the orphanage in ruins and the CJNG forces advancing, the scene was about to become even more desolate. But paradoxically, it was also the moment of greatest clarity for Emiliano and Isabella. The battle unfolding was not merely physical, but a fight for truth, justice, and identity. They were, finally, ready to confront the greatest obstacle of all, their own evolution as human beings, warriors, and allies. Emiliano, until that moment, had been the silent protector. His role as the orphanage's gardener had always reflected his attempt to hide from the world. He was used to operating in the shadows, caring for others unseen, unnoticed, but the revelation of the secret, the betrayal, and the imminent threat of the cartel forced him to confront something much greater, his own fear. Fear of failure, fear of exposing his true identity, fear of losing what he loved most. However, as he observed the chaos around him, something within him transformed. He could no longer be just the man living with a burden. He needed to be the leader the orphanage and the children needed. As the situation worsened, Emiliano made the decision to reveal his past. He had been a covert operations agent, part of a mission aimed at dismantling corruption and trafficking networks in the country. Over the years, he had distanced himself, believing that the best way to protect the truth was to remain invisible. But at that moment, he knew he could no longer hide behind a disguise. He was no longer just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was a scarred man, but also a man who now understood that true courage lay not in avoiding confrontation, but in embracing it, regardless of the consequences. Isabella, in turn, went from a curious observer to a true ally. Her sharp mind and ability to see beyond appearances, traits she had always possessed, were now powerful weapons. At first, she had felt lost, like a simple orphan in a world without direction. But as tensions rose, she realized that her intelligence was not a weakness, but a vital force for resistance. With each step she took, she understood more how much her bravery could change the fate of those around her. When Emiliano saw her finally taking her place on the front lines, he couldn't help but feel proud. The girl he had protected so tenderly was now becoming his battle partner. Their union, between the man marked by the past and the young woman forged by adversity, became an unbeatable force. They complemented each other. He guided her in combat and defense strategies, while she surprised him with clever solutions and quick movements that destabilized the cartel men. Emiliano and Isabella's evolution wasn't just a matter of skill or strength, but also of emotional resilience. The fear, despair, and pain they both felt no longer paralyzed them. On the contrary, they used them as fuel to move forward. Each confrontation with the cartel's hitmen made them stronger, more united, and more determined. Instead of succumbing to the temptation to surrender, they used their pain as motivation to continue, defying each threat with a courage that grew sharper with every step. As the final confrontation drew near, Emiliano realized that the real battle wasn't just against the cartel, but against the system that had allowed crime to thrive. He wasn't just fighting for himself or the children in the orphanage. He was fighting for a Mexico that seemed to have lost its soul, a Mexico that, with the help of people like Isabella, could find a different path. The weight of the secret he carried then became a symbol of resistance. He no longer wished to hide the truth. He wanted it revealed so that the country could rise again. Isabella, now more than ever, saw herself as part of something bigger than she had imagined. She wasn't just an orphan being protected. She was a warrior, a young woman with the power to change the course of events. She knew that alongside Emiliano, she had the chance to make a difference, to fight for a better future. The transformation she underwent was from a simple child to a leader in the making. And this evolution, though painful, was also liberating. The final battle, when it finally arrived, was fierce. But it wasn't just a battle of physical strength. It was a battle of ideals, of resistance against oppression, and a fight for truth. Emiliano and Isabella, now stronger than ever, were prepared to face the cartel with everything they had. Overcoming their own limitations and their personal growth would be the key to the fate of everyone there. With the orphanage transformed into a battlefield, Emiliano and Isabella were ready for the final confrontation, but they knew there was still a long way to go. The leader of the CJNG and his men were getting closer, and the pressure on them was mounting with each passing minute. The preparation for the climax was not only physical, but also emotional and strategic. It was their last chance to save what remained of the truth, the children, and the future of Mexico. The orphanage staff, now completely divided, became key players in the final battle. Those who still trusted Emiliano were organizing in the shadows, setting up makeshift defenses and creating barricades to delay the cartel's advance. However, there were still traitors among them, those willing to sell their souls to the cartel in exchange for a false promise of safety. Emiliano, ever vigilant, knew that any mistake could be fatal. He could no longer fully trust anyone, and paranoia was beginning to consume even those willing to fight. Isabella, for her part, was becoming increasingly crucial to the resistance. She had already managed to sabotage some of the cartel's plans, bringing down one of the communication towers they had erected around the orphanage. But the repercussions of this action had been severe. The cartel, furious, intensified its attacks even further, putting enormous pressure on the orphanage's defenders. Isabella knew that time was against them, and the next phase of the battle would require more than just intelligence and cunning. Meanwhile, Emiliano was meeting with the few remaining allies. He knew that the final confrontation could not be won with passive resistance alone. It was time to attack. He had planned a daring strategy to turn the tables. The orphanage, with its labyrinthine structure and intimate knowledge of the terrain, would be his greatest advantage. Instead of waiting to be surrounded, he and Isabella had devised a plan to divide the cartel's men, confusing them and weakening their forces. The element of surprise would be key. With the plan laid out, Emiliano began to put everything into action. They would use the children who, although small, knew the terrain better than anyone. Every corridor, every secret room, every blind spot in the orphanage would be a trap for the cartel. Emiliano and Isabella, now more than ever, were the pillars of this last effort, with the others helping according to their abilities. Those who remained loyal prepared to defend their lives and their values, while the traitors, who were infiltrated in the ranks of the Allies, began to reveal their true intentions. Meanwhile, the cartel leader was beginning to realize that the orphanage's resistance wasn't something he could simply crush with brute force. He knew Emiliano wasn't just a gardener, but a man with military training and a sharp mind. The upcoming confrontation wouldn't be easy. The CJNG leader was starting to lose patience and therefore opted for one last attempt, a coordinated attack with explosives and elite forces to eradicate any resistance once and for all. The tension was mounting because once the attack began, there would be no turning back. But Emiliano and Isabella were ready. The key to the success of their strategy was the precise coordination between them and the remaining allies. They knew that the final battle would not only be physical, but a struggle of intelligence, endurance, and courage. The last game of chess was about to be played, and both were determined to emerge victorious. As the cartel closed in and the clock ticked against them, Emiliano and Isabella prepared for their final offensive. They were about to launch the decisive blow. Knowing this was their last chance to win, the tension was palpable. Every distant sound, every step closer to the enemy, made Emiliano and Isabella's hearts pound. The orphanage, a place of refuge, was now becoming the final battleground. The orphanage, now in ruins, looked more like a besieged fortress than a refuge for children. The sun was beginning to set, bathing the landscape in a golden light. But the tension was about to explode. Emiliano and Isabella, accompanied by their few remaining allies, were ready for the final confrontation. The CJNG was at the door, and the fate of the orphanage, the children, and possibly all of Mexico hung in the balance. The cartel leader knew his victory was within reach. His men were positioned around the orphanage, ready to storm in and exterminate any resistance. But Emiliano, with the help of Isabella and the others, had a bold and risky plan. The final battle would not be won with brute force, but with cunning intelligence and using the terrain to their advantage. As the cartel advanced through the doors and corridors of the orphanage, Emiliano and Isabella began to execute their strategy. They had divided the group into small squads, all prepared to ambush the enemies at strategic points. The children, under the leadership of the few loyal staff members, were positioned in safe places, away from direct confrontations, but ready to act if necessary. Each step taken by the enemies led them into a carefully prepared trap. The cartel leader, unperturbed, began to move with his men into the orphanage, unaware that he was walking directly into an ambush. Emiliano, with his knowledge of the place, guided the attacks precisely, causing the cartel to become lost in winding, dark corridors where darkness and confusion reigned. The sound of explosions and gunfire echoed off the orphanage walls, but Emiliano knew that time was on his side. In the midst of the chaos, Isabella stood out. She used her cunning to disable the cartel's communication points, cutting their line of defense and weakening their ability to coordinate attacks. She and Emiliano, now more united than ever, moved together as an unbeatable unit, confronting the cartel's men and keeping the morale of their allies high. The young woman was beginning to become a true leader, no longer a helpless orphan, but a warrior fighting for a better future. The confrontation reached its climax when Emiliano and Isabella arrived at the heart of the attack. The cartel leader was there, in a heavily guarded room, with a small group of his men. He knew victory was within reach, but he didn't know that Emiliano was about to turn the tables once and for all. The gardener, the man he had underestimated all along, was about to reveal his true strength. With a shout, Emiliano signaled the final offensive. Violent explosions tore through the orphanage walls, creating a shockwave that knocked down the cartel men. The leader, stunned, tried to regroup, but Emiliano and Isabella were already at his door, determined to defeat him. The fight was fierce, an exchange of gunfire and shouts that filled the air with unbearable tension. But Emiliano, with his military training, managed to disarm the leader and, with a precise blow, knock him to the ground. The battle seemed to be over, but Emiliano knew there was still one last piece to be moved. The real secret, the reason why the cartel had invaded the orphanage, was about to be revealed. The cartel leader, while recovering, tried to stand, but couldn't avoid Emiliano's determined gaze. "You would never understand," Emiliano said, his voice deep but full of purpose. "You think everything is a matter of power and control, but what you destroyed here is the last bastion of something bigger." With a final gesture, Emiliano retrieved the secret documents that had been hidden in the orphanage for so long. He knew that with this, the cartel would lose its advantage, the truth would be exposed, and the empire of corruption they had built would begin to crumble. The final blow was not delivered with a bullet, but with the revelation of a truth that could shake the very foundations of the country. The cartel leader, now captured, was taken by Emiliano's few remaining allies to be handed over to the authorities. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. The orphanage, though victorious, was unrecognizable. The walls, now cracked and burned, bore witness to the fighting, but also to the resistance. Emiliano and Isabella, though tired and wounded, knew they had done what needed to be done. With the cartel defeated and the secret exposed, Emiliano looked at the children in the orphanage, who could now live in a more just world. He and Isabella had overcome their fears and limitations, and together they had given Mexico a chance to rebuild. They had won, not only with strength, but with courage, intelligence, and the unity of all those who believed in the fight for a better future. The orphanage, though destroyed, still stood. The scars of battle were visible in every broken wall, in every shattered window. However, the feeling that hung in the air was not one of defeat, but of renewal. The cartel had been defeated, and the secrets, once kept in the shadows, had finally been exposed. The truth was now in the hands of those who needed it most: the authorities, the victims, and most importantly, the people of Mexico themselves. Emiliano and Isabella, tired but with unwavering spirits, watched the children who, despite the horrors they had witnessed, now seemed calmer. They had fulfilled their mission, but they knew the fight wasn't over. The exposure of the secret documents, which had been protected at such great cost, was only the beginning of a much larger change. The corruption and crime that had infiltrated the power structures wouldn't disappear immediately, but Emiliano believed the seed of resistance had been planted. Isabella, now more mature and aware of her role, looked at Emiliano with a fragile smile. She knew her journey was only beginning. The wounds of the orphanage wouldn't heal all at once, and the damage caused by the cartel and corruption was far from over. But she also knew that resistance, the power to change things, was now in her hands, and that she could continue fighting for the future. Emiliano, for his part, finally felt he could rest. He had been a man marked by the past, a man who carried the weight of secrets and difficult choices. But now, after the victory, he felt he could leave behind the burden that had consumed him for so long. He knew he couldn't change what had happened, but he could ensure the future would be different. He looked at the orphanage, now more than just a place of shelter, but a symbol of the fight for truth and justice. The authorities arrived at the orphanage shortly afterward. The cartel leader, now imprisoned and discredited, would be tried for the crimes he had committed. and the secret documents Emiliano had kept would be used to expose the deep connections between drug trafficking and the highest levels of government. Although much remained to be done, Emiliano felt the battle had been won. As night fell over the orphanage, Emiliano and Isabella walked away, knowing their mission was complete. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew that together they could face anything. The orphanage, even in ruins, would become a symbol of resistance, and the children, once lost in a world of violence and fear, would now have a chance to rebuild their lives. And so, with the fight for justice finally bearing fruit, Emiliano and Isabella walked out the doors of the orphanage, ready to move on, knowing that the world, though still imperfect, was a little closer to change. Months have passed since the fall of the cartel and the destruction of the orphanage. Emiliano, now recognized as a hero by many, received an offer to work for the government, helping to rebuild the corrupted justice system. However, he refused, preferring to live a more discreet life alongside Isabella. The orphanage, rebuilt and transformed, became a beacon of hope for many children. Isabella, with the wisdom she had gained, assumed a leadership role. Together, they knew there was still much to be done, but the most important battle had already been won. If you were moved by Emiliano and Isabella's fight for justice and their overcoming of adversity, share this story with your friends. The power of truth and resistance lies within each of us, and stories like this remind us that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. Leave a comment about what touched you most and share your reflections. Don't forget to follow for more stories that make us reflect on life, struggle, and the courage to change.